Hi, witches. I'm Blair Bathory, and this is the Something Scary podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Whether this is your first time or you're one of the brave souls who join us every week. Also, I hope you all had a great holiday with your family and spending time together. And hopefully you maybe listened to some scary stories together. We'll be having some news soon about our new Patreon experience and hopefully very, very soon, the video version of the podcast. Sometimes the pressure to provide for the holidays drives people to desperate measures. The promise of happiness, the desire to impress with fancy gifts and parties, and the fear of disappointing loved ones can lead to choices that come at a terrible cost. When the pursuit of money takes a dark turn, the consequences are far worse than anyone could ever imagine. First, curiosity invites danger, followed by a deal turned deadly. Finally, in our last story, people demand to know their endings. Before we get to our stories, I wanted to ask if you check out our brand new Something Scary Patreon storyteller experience. You can now dive even deeper into the eerie and mysterious with exclusive perks just for our storyteller fans. By joining this new Patreon tier, you'll unlock access to our monthly film club live stream with me, where we discuss horror films chosen by you. After each live stream, you'll also get exclusive behind-the-scenes access with a Q&A to answer your burning questions. And we're going to have our first meeting on December 16th. But that's not all. Storyteller Experience members will also enjoy a 20% discount on Something Scary merch and a chance to collaborate on our next spine-chilling story. Together, we'll create a terrifying tale that just might end up on the podcast, narrated by me. It's our way of saying thank you for being a part of this amazing community and keeping the spooky spirit alive all year round. Don't miss out. Join the Something Scary Storyteller Experience today for even more chills and insider treats. Head to patreon.com/snarled to sign up now. So, want to hear something scary? Debt to the devil. Sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones you can't see. While you may feel them creeping closer, no matter how hard you try, you won't be able to ignore them, like in this story inspired by Danielė. My name is Dani. Before this happened, I didn't believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. Now, I have no choice. It was November 2017. Back then, I was a 20-year-old babysitter, well-known and trusted in my neighborhood. People liked me because I was reliable, good with kids, and I had a sweet, approachable demeanor. I also had a young daughter of my own, which made parents feel I understood their needs. The holidays were quickly approaching, and I was looking for last-minute gigs to make extra cash for gifts. While scrolling through a Facebook group of local moms, I came across a post from a new neighbor, Jenny, who had just moved into the area with her 6-year-old daughter, Kim. Jenny was looking for a babysitter and offering an absurdly generous €70 per hour. The offer seemed too good to pass up, so I messaged her right away. Jenny was stunning, young, polished, and seemingly put together, but it all felt a little forced, like it was a front. She insisted on meeting me several times before agreeing to let me babysit Kim. We spent weeks chatting, visiting each other's homes, and building trust. By the time she finally said, "You're ready," I thought it was just her being overprotective mom. Looking back, I should have recognized the warning hidden in her words. The day I started, I arrived at Jenny's house prepared for anything, or so I thought. The house was strange. From the outside, it was pristine and modern, but inside, the walls felt old, almost ancient. The air was heavy, as if something unseen was pressing down on the space. Kim was sitting on the couch when I walked in. She was pale, with dark circles under her eyes, and she avoided looking at me. Jenny gave her a sharp, unnatural smile as she left, and the tone of her goodbye to Kim sent a chill through me. The moment the door closed, Kim's demeanor shifted. She began crying silently, her shoulders shaking, and she wouldn't tell me what was wrong. Instead, She pointed toward a door at the end of the hallway. It was plain and unassuming, but something about it felt wrong. Its placement seemed unnatural, as though it didn't belong in the house. Ginny had mentioned that door during our last phone call. She'd been firm. That door stays locked unless there's an emergency. You'll know if you need to open it, but otherwise, leave it alone. Her words echoed in my mind as Kim pleaded with me to unlock it. I told her I couldn't open the door, that I didn't have a key. Kim laughed, a hollow, unsettling sound that didn't match her small frame, and wandered off to watch TV. The rest of the evening was spent in a state of unease. The house felt alive, but its silence was unnerving. Every creak of the floorboards and groan of the walls set my nerves on edge. While I was making dinner, Ginny called to check in. She sounded calm at first. When I mentioned Kim asking about the door, her voice tightened. She told me to call her immediately if Kim asked again, then hung up abruptly. An hour later, the knocking started. At first, it was faint, like a tree branch tapping against the windows, but the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. It came from every direction, the walls, the ceiling, even the floor beneath my feet. I tried to ignore it, brushing it off as my imagination, but the knocking grew louder, more incessant. Kim appeared in the kitchen, standing eerily still. She didn't say a word, just pointed toward the door. The air around us seemed to shift, growing colder and heavier, and I felt a pressure building in my chest. I tried calling Ginny again, but she didn't pick up. Panic set in as the knocking turned into pounding, each thud reverberating through the house. Kim walked down the hall, her tiny frame dwarfed by the oppressive shadows that seemed to gather around her. I wanted to stop her, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. She reached the door and, without hesitation, opened it. The room beyond was dark, too dark. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was a void, an emptiness that seemed to swallow everything. For a moment, I thought I saw movement in the darkness, shadows twisting and writhing like living things. A low, guttural whisper filled the air, words I couldn't understand but instinctively feared. Then Kim stepped inside and closed the door behind her. My phone rang, breaking the suffocating silence. It was Ginny. Her voice was frantic, almost hysterical, as she demanded to know what had happened. When I told her Kim had opened the door and gone inside, she screamed, a raw, guttural sound of despair. She told me to leave immediately, but I hesitated, my gaze fixed on the door. Ginny arrived minutes later, disheveled and shaking. She shoved past me and flung the door open. I caught a glimpse inside, and my heart nearly stopped. Shadows covered the walls, but these remnants of life weren't still. They pulsed and shifted, forming grotesque shapes that defied explanation. The whispering grew louder, a cacophony of voices speaking in unison. I thought I saw eyes, dozens of them, watching us from within the dark. Ginny stepped inside, calling for Kim, but I couldn't move. My body was frozen, paralyzed by a fear I'd never experienced before. Moments later, Ginny reappeared, her face pale and streaked with tears. She slammed the door shut and handed me an envelope with my payment, begging me to leave. I didn't argue. I booked it to my car, the envelope of cash clutched in my trembling hand. The whispers hadn't stopped, faint but constant, like a breath just behind me. The driveway felt endless, and the flickering streetlights didn't help my confidence. I made it to the car, but when I started the engine, I heard a knock on the roof, a deliberate, rhythmic sound. My stomach turned, but I didn't look back. Gravel sprayed as I sped away, but the whispers followed. At home, it got worse. Lights flickered, the faint smell of damp earth lingered. The knocking started again, this time on the walls. Shadows shifted in the corners of every room. One night, I woke to find my daughter standing at my bedside staring. "Who's the lady in the corner?" she whispered, pointing to the darkest part of the room. I called Ginny, desperate for answers, but her voice was cold. She told me because I wouldn't leave it alone, now it wouldn't leave me alone. Then the line went dead. Last night, I looked in the mirror and saw something staring back. eyes darker than mine, filled with an emptiness. I don't sleep anymore. I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I hear them whispering, waiting, watching. That door should have never been opened. Have you ever felt like something was watching you, even when you were alone? What would you do if you were told to never open a door, but you couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting behind it? Would you have opened the door? Sometimes the price of a dream is far greater than anyone is prepared to pay, like in this story inspired by Sara. Ravi wiped his hands on his apron, the faint smell of salami and mustard clinging to his fingers. Another endless evening shift at Delmonico's, the sandwich shop that consumed most of his time outside school. His dream of attending college to study literature seemed almost laughable. He wasn't just saving for tuition, he was saving for an escape from the drudgery from this town, from people like JC. 2 turkey subs, light mayo, no pickles. He repeated the order under his breath, trying to focus on the rhythm of the job. Ravi, register, Edie called out, pulling him from his thoughts. His heart jumped at the sound of her voice. Edie, with her effortless wit and sharp humor, was the only person in school who truly got him. Her presence made the long hours bearable, even if the fact that she was the boss's daughter made their easy camaraderie feel precarious. As he slid behind the counter, the door jingled, and in strutted JC, the school's self-proclaimed king of everything. Ravi braced himself, the air thickening with dread. JC ordered a BLT with an exaggerated drawl, barely acknowledging Ravi's presence. Ravi worked quickly, trying to finish before JC had time to find something to ridicule. When the sandwich was handed over, JC didn't even glance at it before tossing it back. It hit Ravi right in the chest, falling to the floor. JC's voice dripped with a mocking tone when he shouted that he needed more bacon. The shop fell silent. Ravi bent down to pick up the sandwich, his face burning with embarrassment. His apology was automatic, muttered through clenched teeth. He hurried to the back to clean up. While seething in the break room, Ravi didn't hear Edie snapping at JC, nor did he see the light in her eyes as she defended him. All he felt was the crushing weight of inadequacy. He spent the rest of the shift in a daze, the humiliation weighing on him like a second skin. On the walk home, the cold air did little to soothe his frayed nerves. Each step felt heavier, each thought more painful and depressing. By the time he reached the empty park near his apartment, his frustration boiled over. "I just need someone to give me a chance." The words tore from his throat, jagged and raw. Suddenly, the night answered with an unnatural stillness. Then, a voice cut through the silence.
"Someone hurt you."
Ravi spun around. A man in a black coat stood a few feet away, his face pale and sharp-featured. Ravi couldn't recall seeing him approach. He asked who he was. The man smiled, an unsettling curve of his thin lips when he told Ravi he was just there to help. Ravi stepped back, weary, but the man's tone was soothing, almost hypnotic.
"I overheard your plea,"
he continued.
"You want a chance to be seen, respected, even admired. I can give you that."
Ravi's breath hitched. The words sank into him, filling the hole in his heart that had been left by years of feeling invisible. How?
It's simple. I can offer you money, power, popularity, everything you've ever wanted. All I ask in return is a small favor.
The man's smile widened.
Your soul.
Ravi froze. The absurdity of the statement almost made him laugh, but the man's unwavering gaze rooted him in place.
Think of it as an investment.
The man pressed.
You have everything to gain.
Ravi thought of JC's sneer, the endless grind of sandwich making. He thought of how small he felt every day and how badly he wanted to be someone else, someone important. "Deal," he said, the word tasting foreign on his tongue. The man extended a hand, and Ravi shook it. A cold shiver ran through him. When he blinked, the man was gone. The changes were immediate. By the next day, Ravi's name was on everyone's lips. Money appeared in his account without explanation, and people gravitated toward him, eager for his attention. Even JC, once a looming shadow, seemed to shrink in his presence. Ravi quit his job at Delmonico's with a smirk. He didn't need it anymore. He bought new clothes, threw lavish parties, and drove to school in a sleek car he hadn't even realized he owned until it was in his driveway. But none of it mattered without Edie. When he approached her after school, expecting the admiration he now received from everyone else, her expression stopped him cold. "You've changed," she said. "In a good way, right?" he asked, his voice too eager. "No," she replied, her tone flat. "This isn't you." The words stung more than he cared to admit, but he brushed them off. She didn't understand. How could she? He'd spent years clawing his way out of mediocrity, and now he finally had a taste of something better. Still, her rejection gnawed at him. At a party a week later, Ravi saw his chance to prove himself when JC arrived, uninvited. JC was drunk and loud, pushing his way through the crowd like he owned the place. Ravi's stomach tightened as he watched him shove past people, slurring insults and laughing at his own jokes. The flicker of resentment inside Ravi grew hotter with each step JC took. The moment came when JC stumbled too close, his mocking voice louder than the music. The crowd quieted as Ravi stepped forward. Words were thrown like punches, sharp and biting. Then came the real shoves, and before Ravi knew it, he had swung. His fist crashed into JC, and the force of it sent him sprawling to the ground. Ravi barely registered the gasp around him. Heat spread through his hands, a strange, burning sensation, and when he looked down, his fingers didn't look right. His nails were dark and sharp, his knuckles swollen like claws. In the faces of the crowd, he caught glimpses of his reflection, eyes glowing faintly, his features twisted into something unrecognizable, something wrong. JC's cries turned into wet, choking sounds as blood poured from his face. His nose was broken, his lips split wide. Ravi grabbed him again, yanking him up only to throw him down harder. The weight of his own strength felt alien, as if it didn't belong to him. The room was silent except for JC's broken gasps. Ravi stood over him, breathing hard, his hands trembling as he stared at the damage he'd caused. "Ravi!" Edie shouted, her voice sharp and filled with horror. He turned to see her standing in the doorway, pale and wide-eyed. She didn't move, her shock freezing her in place when she asked what he was doing. The words felt distant, unreal, when Ravi said he was proving he wasn't a joke. Edie shook her head and backed away, her face twisted, not in anger, but something worse, disgust. "You're not the Ravi I knew," she said, and then she was gone. The arrest was swift. By the next morning, Ravi's face was splashed across social media and the local news with assault charges. The boy who had once been invisible was now infamous. In the confines of the jail, Ravi sat on the cot, staring at the floor. His world, once so full of promise, had crumbled. The wealth, the power, the fleeting attention of strangers, all of it felt meaningless. Edie visited him once. She sat across from him, her arms folded tightly. She didn't even know why she was there. She just felt a pull to see him one more time. "Did it for you," Ravi whispered. "Everything. Just wanted you to notice me." Her laugh was bitter, almost a sob when she said, "You think I didn't notice you? I already liked you, Ravi. The real you. This, whatever you've become, I can't even look at you." Her words landed like a punch to the gut. As she left, the room grew colder. Ravi stared at his reflection in the glass divider and froze. The man in black's face appeared, his smile wide and full of cruel satisfaction when he told Ravi he now belonged to him. Ravi's shadow began to shift, detaching from his body. It loomed over him, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. As it took a step toward him, Ravi couldn't even scream. If you were in Ravi's position, feeling invisible and powerless, would you be tempted to make a deal for instant success? What would you pay? Sometimes, the stories you leave unfinished find their own way to an ending, and it might just include you. Like in this story written by Christopher Barron. Gil worked a simple job as an office technician. He helped keep the front office of the local state building running smoothly. He liked the routine, but sometimes it felt like he was living on autopilot. Work, take care of his family, play some video games, and sleep, over and over again. One morning, Gil arrived at the office to find the office unusually quiet. As he booted up the front desk computer, a strange symbol flashed on the screen intermittently. It resembled a trefoil knot, but with jagged lines and 2 extra loops. Gil frowned. The computer was known for glitches, so he brushed it off and moved on. A few days later, a young man came in to deliver some documents. Gil barely noticed him at first, but the longer he looked at him, the stranger he became. It wasn't obvious, just a strange energy that made Gil uneasy. The man handed over his paperwork and left without a word. As Gil reviewed the document, his heart skipped a beat. Next to the man's signature was the same symbol from the computer. Coincidence? Gil muttered under his breath, filing the papers away. But as the days passed, the young man returned again and again, each time signing with that eerie symbol. Gil tried to ignore it, burying himself in his work. He'd always prided himself on being level-headed. Years ago, he'd written short horror stories as a hobby, so he knew how easy it was to spook yourself by seeing a pattern that wasn't really there. But he hadn't written anything in years. Life got in the way, and his creative spark had dulled. One afternoon, Gil was called to the loading dock to receive a delivery. As he helped the delivery men, he noticed a figure loitering across the lot. The man's face looked disturbingly decayed, as if it was rotting away. Around his neck hung what appeared to be a mask. Before Gil could react, the man pulled the mask over his head, revealing a perfectly normal face. He turned, locking eyes with Gil, and smiled. Then he walked away. Gil rushed back to his desk, shaken. When he sat down, 2 eerie dolls appeared next to his monitor. One was a young nurse, her porcelain face cracked, and the other was an elderly woman with a sinister grin. "Okay, who's playing jokes?" Gil called out, but his supervisor's office was empty, and his cubicle neighbors were nowhere to be found. Sudden giggles broke the silence. The sound was faint, but unmistakable, and it seemed to come from the dolls. Gil stood abruptly, his heart racing. He headed outside for air, convinced he was overworked. He sat on a bench, inhaling the crisp air, when he noticed someone standing nearby. It was a young man with a symbol. His expression was no longer neutral, it was furious. He raised a hand, palm outstretched, and the tree next to Gil began to shudder. Roots burst from the ground, snaking toward him. Gil bolted back inside. When he returned to his desk, the dolls had shifted positions, now facing him directly. The elderly one held a note. "Conference room, now." Gil hesitated, but decided to check it out. A meeting would be welcome reprieve from his unraveling nerves. As he stepped into the room, the door slammed shut behind him. Vines twisted across it, sealing him inside. The young man stood in the corner, arms crossed. Beside him was the rotting man, his grotesque face barely concealed beneath his mask. On the table, the dolls sat with devilish smirks. "Why are you doing this?" Gil stammered. "What do you want from me?" the rotting man rasped.
You abandoned us. Left us to rot.
What are you talking about? Gil demanded. The young man held up a laptop, Gil's laptop. This is our home, he said, voice trembling with rage. This is where you left us, unfinished and forgotten. Memories flooded back, the stories Gil had started but never finished. The young man, the rotting figure, even the dolls. They were his creations. He had given them life, only to abandon them in his hard drive. You want me to finish your stories? Gil said, his voice barely above a whisper. They all nodded. The rotting man shoved a chair toward him.
You've had long enough. Finish them.
Gil sat down and started typing. His hands trembled, and his mind raced to remember the stories he had left behind. But the words didn't come. Faster, the young man growled. We've waited long enough. Vines snaked around Gil's legs, binding him to the chair. The nurse doll climbed onto the table, her cracked face splitting further as she scowled.
You wrote us with power,
she hissed.
But you never finished what you started. We've been stuck in limbo because of you.
The elderly doll clawed at her own face, and Gil's hand mimicked the motion involuntarily, leaving scratches across his cheek.
You made us,
she sneered.
You should know what we're capable of.
Gil's fear turned into desperation. If they wanted a story, he would give them one. He typed furiously, weaving a tale where each of them found resolution and disappeared into the world they were meant to inhabit. As he typed the final sentence, the room grew silent. When he hit the last period, they vanished. Gil slumped back into his chair, trembling with relief. But the moment was short-lived. The vines tightened around him, pulling him toward the laptop. The screen flickered, and new words appeared.
Too late, Gil. You took too long.
The room faded into darkness. All around him, familiar settings emerged. The forest, the hospital, the decrepit house. He wasn't in the office anymore. He was inside his own stories, trapped inside his stories. And this time, the characters were writing his fate, and it was certainly going to be a torturous one. Do you believe stories or ideas can take on a life of their own? Has it ever happened to you? If so, tell us your story by sending us an email at somethingscary@snarled.com. This week's podcast stories were edited by Sara Lukasiewicz, narration by Blair Bathory, audio edited and mixed by Fitz Harris, additional audio editing by Calvin Linderman, produced by Ana Villalobos, executive produced by Gail Gilman, music by Sapphire Sindalo and Calvin Linderman.